I never thought selling a few old pieces of furniture could turn my quiet suburban life into a living nightmare. What started as a simple Craigslist transaction became a 6-month ordeal that made me question everything I thought I knew about privacy and safety. My name is Jennifer, and I've lived in Millfield, California for 8 years. It's one of those small towns where everyone knows everyone, nestled between rolling hills covered in oak trees. After my grandmother passed away last spring, I inherited her Victorian-era furniture collection. Beautiful pieces, but they didn't fit my modern apartment's aesthetic. Rather than let them gather dust in storage, I decided to sell them on Craigslist. I posted detailed photos of a mahogany writing desk, matching bookshelf, antique jewelry box, and several vintage lamps. Within hours, I received dozens of responses. Most were typical lowball offers or obvious scams, but one message stood out. It came from someone named Marcus Thompson who demonstrated extensive knowledge about Victorian furniture makers and asked specific questions about the piece's provenance. Marcus offered to buy everything at full asking price, nearly $4,000 if he could inspect them first. He seemed legitimate, professional even, mentioning he was a collector who specialized in preserving historical pieces. We arranged to meet that Saturday morning at my apartment on Cedar Lane. When Marcus arrived in a pristine white 2020 Ford Transit van, my first impression was positive. He appeared to be in his mid-40s, well-dressed in khakis and a button-down shirt, carrying a leather portfolio. He was knowledgeable about antiques, pointing out makers' marks I hadn't noticed and explaining the historical significance of various design elements. "These pieces have incredible sentimental value," he said, running his hands along the writing desk's surface. "They tell stories. I can almost feel the history in them." Something about the way he said it made me slightly uncomfortable, but I attributed it to collector enthusiasm. He examined each piece meticulously, taking photos and notes. When he opened the jewelry box and heard the tiny music mechanism, his eyes lit up in a way that seemed almost childlike. "This is exceptional," he whispered. "Absolutely exceptional." Marcus paid in cash, counting out $400 bills with obvious pleasure. He was so excited about the purchase that he asked detailed questions about my grandmother, where she'd lived, how long she'd owned the pieces, whether other family members had used them. I shared some basic information, thinking it was natural curiosity from someone who appreciated the item's history. The transaction felt completely normal. Marcus was polite, professional, and genuinely appreciative. He carefully loaded everything into his van, thanking me repeatedly and mentioning he looked forward to giving the pieces the care they deserved. That should have been the end of our interaction. It wasn't. 2 weeks later, I was shocked to see the same white Ford Transit van parked in the driveway of the house next door. The rental property had been vacant for months, and I hadn't seen any moving trucks or typical signs of new tenants. But there was Marcus, unloading boxes and my grandmother's furniture. My stomach dropped. This couldn't be a coincidence. I watched from my kitchen window as Marcus carefully carried each piece inside. He handled them with the same reverence he'd shown during the purchase, but seeing them again felt wrong somehow. They looked different in his possession, like they'd lost something essential. That evening, I noticed lights on in every room of the house next door. Through the windows, I could see Marcus arranging and rearranging the furniture. He seemed to be setting up each piece in specific locations, taking photos and making adjustments. This continued until nearly 3 a.m. Over the next few days, I began noticing Marcus's routine. He would stand at his upstairs window for long periods, looking directly at my apartment. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe he was just admiring the view or checking out the neighborhood. But his focus was clearly on my building, specifically my unit. When I left for work each morning, I saw Marcus watching from behind his curtains. When I returned home, there he was again. If I went to my mailbox, he would suddenly appear in his yard, pretending to tend to plants that didn't exist. If I sat on my small balcony to read, Marcus would position himself at his window where he could observe me. The surveillance became more obvious when I realized Marcus had somehow learned my schedule. He knew when I left for work, when I returned, when I went grocery shopping. If I deviated from my routine, staying late at work or stopping somewhere unexpected, Marcus would be visibly agitated, pacing in his yard or standing prominently at his windows. I started documenting everything. Photos of Marcus watching me, notes about his behavior, screenshots of our original Craigslist conversation. I also began researching the rental property next door and discovered it had been leased just 3 days after our furniture transaction. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. The situation escalated when I noticed Marcus had installed security cameras around his property. While this wasn't unusual, their positioning was clearly designed to monitor my apartment rather than protect his own property. The cameras were angled to capture my front door, my parking space, and my balcony. I decided to confront him directly. I walked over to his house on a Saturday afternoon, hoping a direct conversation might resolve whatever misunderstanding had led to this bizarre situation. Marcus answered the door quickly, as if he'd been watching me approach. "Jennifer," he said with unsettling enthusiasm. "What a pleasant surprise. Marcus, I need to ask you something. Did you move here because of the furniture you bought from me?" His expression shifted, becoming defensive. "I don't know what you mean. I needed a place to live, and this house became available. Pure coincidence." "It doesn't feel like a coincidence. You've been watching me constantly since you moved in." Marcus's demeanor changed completely. The friendly facade dropped, revealing something colder underneath. "Those pieces belonged to your grandmother for 60 years. They absorbed her energy, her memories. When you sell something with that much history, you're not just selling furniture. You're selling a connection." "What does that mean?" "It means those pieces still belong with family. They're not comfortable here without their rightful owner nearby." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Marcus, this is extremely inappropriate. You can't move next door to someone just because you bought their furniture." He stepped closer to me, his voice becoming intense. "You don't understand the significance of what you sold me. These aren't just antiques. They're repositories of memory and experience. Your grandmother's essence is embedded in every grain of wood, every metal fitting. They need to be near someone who understands their history." I backed away from his door. "This conversation is over. Please stop watching me, or I'll contact the police." Marcus smiled in a way that made my skin crawl. "The police can't do anything about a man living in his own home and appreciating his legally purchased antiques." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Marcus's words and the strange intensity in his voice when he talked about the furniture, needing to be near family. I realized I had seriously underestimated the situation. I started researching Marcus Thompson online and discovered disturbing information. He had previously been involved in legal disputes with other antique sellers. Court records showed he had been accused of stalking behavior by at least 2 people who had sold him furniture. In one case, he had been issued a restraining order after repeatedly contacting a seller and showing up at their workplace uninvited. The pattern was becoming clear. Marcus wasn't just a furniture collector, he was obsessed with the previous owners of his purchases. He seemed to believe that buying someone's personal belongings created some kind of ongoing relationship or entitlement to monitor their lives. I contacted the Millfield Police Department and filed a report about Marcus's surveillance behavior. Officer Davis took my statement and reviewed the photos I'd collected. While he agreed the situation was concerning, he explained that Marcus hadn't technically broken any laws. Living next door and installing security cameras on his own property weren't illegal, even if his motivations were questionable. "Document everything," Officer Davis advised. "If he makes direct contact, approaches your property, or makes any threats, call us immediately. We'll keep patrol cars in the area more frequently." The increased police presence seemed to make Marcus more cautious, but it didn't stop his surveillance. He became more subtle about watching me, using different windows and varying his routine. But I could feel his constant observation like a weight on my shoulders. The breaking point came when I discovered Marcus had somehow obtained personal information about my family. He left a handwritten note in my mailbox that referenced details about my grandmother's life that I had never shared with him. The note described specific memories and experiences that only someone with intimate knowledge of my family history could know. Your grandmother used to sit at that writing desk every morning, the note read. She would write letters to her sister in Portland and keep a daily journal in the small drawer on the right side. The jewelry box played for Elise when she was a young woman, but the mechanism slowed down over the years. These pieces remember her touch, her voice, her presence. They're lonely without family nearby. The level of detail was impossible to explain unless Marcus had somehow researched my grandmother extensively or gained access to private family information. I felt violated and frightened by the implication that he had been investigating my family history. I immediately contacted Officer Davis again and showed him the note. This time, the police took more direct action. They visited Marcus and warned him about harassing behavior and potential stalking charges. They also advised him that any further unwanted contact with me would result in immediate legal consequences. Marcus's response was to become even more obsessive. He started leaving small items related to Victorian-era furniture on my doorstep: old photographs, furniture catalogs, historical articles about antique makers. Each item came with a note explaining how it connected to the pieces he had purchased from me. The final straw came when I realized Marcus had been inside my grandmother's house. He left a note describing details about the room where the furniture had originally been placed, details I had never mentioned and that weren't visible in any photos I had posted online. He knew about specific wallpaper patterns, the arrangement of other furniture, even the view from the writing desk toward the garden window. This meant Marcus had either broken into my grandmother's house before I inherited it, or he had somehow gained access to private family photos or documentation. Either possibility was terrifying and clearly criminal. I gathered all evidence of Marcus's escalating behavior and filed formal stalking charges with the police. The investigation revealed that Marcus had indeed researched my family extensively, using public records and genealogy websites to learn about my grandmother's life and property. He had also driven to her former residence and taken photographs of the house from various angles. Marcus was arrested and charged with stalking, harassment, and trespassing. During the investigation, police discovered he had engaged in similar behavior with at least 6 other people from whom he had purchased antiques. His house was filled with detailed files about each seller, including photographs, personal information, and maps of their daily routines. The court issued a permanent restraining order requiring Marcus to stay at least 500 yards away from me and to have no contact of any kind. He was also required to sell the house next door and move out of Millfield entirely. Marcus violated the restraining order twice before finally leaving town. He was arrested both times for attempting to contact me through intermediaries and for driving past my apartment building. The second violation resulted in a 30-day jail sentence and a final warning that any future contact would result in felony charges. It's been 4 months since Marcus finally left Millfield. I still feel anxious about selling personal items online and have installed additional security measures at my apartment. The experience taught me that some people can develop dangerous obsessions based on minimal interactions, and that personal belongings can become focal points for disturbing behavior. I often wonder about those antique pieces and whether Marcus still has them somewhere. Part of me hopes he was forced to sell them as part of his legal consequences, but another part of me worries that they're still enabling his obsessive behavior with some other unsuspecting seller. The scariest realization is how easily this situation could have been much worse. If Marcus had been more aggressive or less concerned about legal consequences, his surveillance and obsession could have escalated into direct physical threats or violence. Have you ever had an experience with someone who became inappropriately obsessed after a simple transaction or interaction? What red flags do you watch for when selling personal items online, and how do you protect your privacy when dealing with strangers? I thought I was just buying a simple extension ladder for some home maintenance work. What I discovered about the seller turned a routine Craigslist purchase into the most disturbing encounter I've ever had with another human being. My name is David, and I work as a maintenance supervisor for Riverside Medical Center here in Bakersfield, California. Last October, I needed a 16-foot extension ladder for some gutter work at my house on Pine Road. Rather than spending full retail price at Home Depot, I decided to check Craigslist for a used one in good condition. I found exactly what I was looking for in a post titled, "Moving Sale Quality Extension Ladder $75. The photos showed a practically new Werner ladder with minimal wear. The seller, who went by Tom M., claimed he was relocating for work and could only take essential items. His story seemed believable, and the price was fair for what appeared to be a high-quality ladder. I contacted Tom through the Craigslist email system and arranged to meet him that Saturday morning at his address on Industrial Boulevard. He responded quickly and professionally, providing clear directions and confirming our 9 a.m. appointment. When I arrived at the location, I was surprised to find myself at a large warehouse facility rather than a residential address. The building looked like a light industrial space, with several bay doors and a small office entrance. Tom's listing hadn't mentioned this was a commercial location, but I assumed he was using the space for storage during his move. Tom met me at the front entrance, and my first impression was positive. He appeared to be in his late 30s, wearing work clothes and safety boots that suggested he was familiar with construction or industrial work. He was friendly and knowledgeable about the ladder's specifications, pointing out its weight rating and safety features. "I hate to let this one go," Tom said as he showed me the ladder. "It's been incredibly reliable, but I just can't justify shipping it across the country." The ladder was exactly as advertised, practically new condition with only minor scuff marks from normal use. I inspected it thoroughly and was satisfied with the quality. We completed the transaction quickly, with Tom helping me load it into my 2018 Chevrolet Silverado. As I was securing the ladder in my truck bed, I noticed something odd. Through one of the warehouse's open bay doors, I could see what appeared to be dozens of identical ladders arranged in neat rows. They all looked exactly like the one I had just purchased, same brand, same model, same apparent condition. "That's a lot of ladders," I commented casually. Tom's demeanor shifted slightly. "Oh, those belong to my business partner. We're liquidating our construction equipment inventory." His explanation seemed reasonable, but something about his tone made me pay closer attention. I thanked him for the ladder and drove home, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something about the situation wasn't quite right. Over the next few weeks, I occasionally checked Craigslist for other items I needed around the house. Out of curiosity, I searched for ladders and was surprised to find another posting that looked remarkably similar to Tom's original ad. Same ladder model, same price, same moving sale story, but posted under a different name. My Car. The photos were different, but the ladder appeared identical to the one I had purchased. Even more suspicious, the seller claimed to be moving for work and could only take essential items, the exact same story Tom had used. I began monitoring Craigslist more systematically and discovered a disturbing pattern. Every few days, a new listing appeared for the same type of Werner extension ladder. The seller's name always changed, but the price remained consistent at $75, and the story was always some variation of moving sale or downsizing. Each listing used slightly different photos, taken from various angles and in different lighting conditions, but trained eyes could see they were all essentially the same product. The sellers used different email addresses and phone numbers, but there were subtle similarities in their communication style and response patterns. I decided to investigate further by responding to one of the newer listings, this time using a different email address and claiming to be interested in purchasing multiple ladders for a small contracting business. The seller, now calling himself Steve K., initially said he only had one ladder available but mentioned he might know someone who had others. This confirmed my suspicion that all these listings were coming from the same source. Someone was manufacturing or acquiring large quantities of identical ladders and selling them individually through fake Craigslist accounts, maintaining the fiction that each was a personal item being sold due to moving or life changes. But the story got much stranger when I decided to drive by the warehouse on Industrial Boulevard again. I parked across the street and observed the facility for several hours on a Saturday afternoon. During that time, I witnessed a steady stream of people arriving to pick up ladders, at least 8 different buyers in the span of 3 hours. Each transaction followed the same pattern. A customer would arrive, meet with Tom, or someone who looked like him, inspect a ladder, complete the purchase, and load it into their vehicle. From my observation point, it was clear this was a regular commercial operation disguised as individual personal sales. What made this discovery truly disturbing wasn't just the deceptive sales practice, but what I observed next. After each customer left, Tom would return to the warehouse and spend considerable time writing in a large notebook, or ledger. He appeared to be documenting detailed information about each transaction, far more than would be necessary for simple record keeping. My suspicions were confirmed when I saw Tom photographing customers' vehicles, including their license plates, and taking notes about their appearance and behavior. This wasn't just about selling ladders, he was systematically collecting information about his buyers for unknown purposes. I realized I needed to understand the scope of this operation, so I created multiple fake email addresses and began responding to various ladder listings under different names. Each time, I received responses from sellers with different names but remarkably similar communication patterns. They all used nearly identical phrases when describing the ladders and gave similar explanations for selling. Through these interactions, I discovered that Tom had been running this scheme for at least 8 months, posting 3 to 4 ladder listings per week under different identities. Based on my calculations, he had potentially sold hundreds of ladders while maintaining the fiction that each was a personal item from someone moving or downsizing. The documentation aspect became even more concerning when I realized Tom was likely violating tax laws by operating a commercial business while representing each sale as a personal transaction. But more troubling was the question of why he was collecting detailed information about his customers. I decided to contact some of the other buyers to see if they had noticed anything unusual about their transactions. Using social media and public records, I was able to identify several people who had purchased ladders from Tom's various fake accounts. Most buyers reported normal transactions and were unaware of the larger pattern. However, 2 people mentioned receiving follow-up contact from the seller weeks after their purchase. In both cases, Tom had called them under the pretense of checking on the ladder's performance, but had asked detailed questions about how they were using it and where they lived. One buyer, a woman named Sarah, told me that Tom had shown up at her house unannounced 3 weeks after she purchased the ladder. He claimed he was in the neighborhood and wanted to see how she was getting along with her purchase. She found his behavior strange and intrusive but hadn't considered it threatening at the time. This information convinced me that Tom's operation went far beyond simple sales fraud. He was using the ladder transactions as a way to identify and monitor people, possibly for purposes that could pose safety risks to his customers. I compiled all my evidence and contacted the Bakersfield Police Department's Fraud Division. Detective Martinez was assigned to investigate the case and was immediately concerned about both the commercial fraud and the potential stalking behavior. The investigation revealed that Tom's real name was Thomas Richardson, and he had been operating the ladder scheme as part of a larger pattern of deceptive business practices. The warehouse facility was legitimately rented, but he had been misrepresenting his business activities to avoid proper licensing and tax obligations. More disturbing was the discovery of Tom's detailed customer database. Police found extensive files containing information about hundreds of buyers, including their addresses, phone numbers, vehicle descriptions, and notes about their personal circumstances. Some files contained photographs of customers' homes and detailed observations about their daily routines. Tom had been using the ladder sales as a way to gain access to people's personal information and establish reasons to contact them later. The follow-up calls and visits were part of a systematic effort to gather intelligence about his customers for reasons that remained unclear. During the search of Tom's warehouse, police discovered he had been manufacturing the ladders himself using equipment and materials purchased from various suppliers. The ladders were actually well made and safe, but he was producing them at a cost of approximately $20 each and selling them for $75 while claiming they were used personal items. Tom was arrested and charged with multiple counts of fraud, tax evasion, and stalking-related offenses. The investigation also revealed he had similar operations in 2 other California cities, selling different types of tools and equipment through fake personal sale listings. The most chilling discovery was Tom's apparent long-term plan to use his customer database for more serious criminal activities. Police found evidence suggesting he had been researching home security systems and monitoring the travel patterns of customers who lived alone or in isolated areas. Tom ultimately pleaded guilty to fraud and stalking charges in exchange for providing information about his methods and customer targeting strategies. He received a 3-year prison sentence and was required to pay restitution to customers who had been deceived by his fake personal sale claims. I testified at Tom's sentencing hearing about the impact his surveillance had on my sense of security and privacy. Several other customers also testified about receiving unwanted contact and feeling unsafe after their transactions. The case highlighted how easily criminals can exploit online marketplaces to gain access to potential victims while appearing to engage in legitimate commerce. Tom's scheme was particularly insidious because it combined financial fraud with personal surveillance, using people's desire to find good deals as a way to collect information for potentially dangerous purposes. Since Tom's arrest, I've been much more cautious about Craigslist transactions, especially for items that could provide sellers with insights into my home's security or personal circumstances. I always meet sellers in public locations now and never provide more personal information than absolutely necessary. The experience taught me that some criminals are willing to invest significant time and resources into elaborate schemes that appear completely legitimate on the surface. Tom's latter operation would have continued indefinitely if I hadn't noticed the pattern and decided to investigate. Have you ever encountered sellers on Craigslist or other platforms who seem to have suspicious quantities of personal items for sale? What red flags do you watch for when buying from individuals online, and how do you protect your personal information during these transactions? I've been working as a financial advisor for over 15 years, and I thought I'd seen every type of financial scam imaginable. But what happened with one of my longtime clients last November opened my eyes to how sophisticated and cruel these operations have become, especially when they target elderly parents through their adult children. My name is Michelle, and I work for Westfield Financial Services here in Springfield, Illinois. Mrs. Patricia Henderson had been my client for nearly 8 years, a retired school teacher in her mid-60s who had always been extremely careful with her finances. She lived modestly on Elm Drive in a small house she'd owned for 30 years, and her investment decisions were consistently conservative and well-researched. That's why I was immediately concerned when Patricia called me on a Tuesday morning in a state of panic, asking to liquidate a substantial portion of her retirement savings to buy a car. Not just any car, she needed exactly $18,500 in cash by the end of the week to purchase a specific 2017 Honda Accord she'd found on Craigslist. "Mrs. Henderson, this seems very sudden," I said during our phone conversation. "Last month you mentioned you were happy with your current vehicle. What's changed?" Patricia's voice was shaky and strained. "It's for my son Kevin. He's in serious trouble, and I need to help him immediately. There's no time to explain everything, but this car purchase is absolutely critical." Kevin was Patricia's only child, a 34-year-old software developer who lived in Chicago. I'd met him a few times over the years when he visited his mother, and he'd always seemed responsible and financially stable. Patricia had never mentioned any problems with Kevin or indicated he needed financial assistance. "Can you give me some details about why Kevin needs this specific car so urgently?" I pressed. "Maybe there's a better way to help him that doesn't require liquidating your investments." Patricia became defensive and evasive. "I can't discuss the details, but Kevin is in danger if I don't get him this money immediately. He found a car on Craigslist that the seller will accept cash for, and it has to happen this week." Something about the situation felt wrong, but Patricia was insistent. She had every legal right to access her money, and she was clearly under enormous stress. I processed her withdrawal request but asked her to come into the office to complete the paperwork in person, hoping I could learn more about the situation. When Patricia arrived at my office the next day, she looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her hands were shaking as she signed the necessary documents, and she kept checking her phone anxiously. I'd never seen her in such a distressed state. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm concerned about you," I said gently. "You seem extremely upset. Is there anything else I can do to help?" Patricia broke down and started crying. "My son is being blackmailed. Someone has compromising information about him, and they're demanding money to keep it private. If I don't help him pay, they'll ruin his career and his life." My heart sank. This had all the hallmarks of a sophisticated scam targeting elderly parents through fake emergencies involving their adult children. These schemes had become increasingly common, with criminals using detailed personal information to make their stories believable. "Patricia, have you spoken directly to Kevin about this situation?" I asked. "He called me Sunday night, crying and begging for help. He was so ashamed and scared. The people blackmailing him said if he involves the police or tells anyone else, they'll release the information immediately." "Did you recognize Kevin's voice? Did he mention specific details that only he would know?" Patricia looked confused by my questions. "Of course it was Kevin. He knew about our family, about his childhood. He was just so upset and frightened." I realized Patricia might be the victim of a grandparent scam variant, where criminals impersonate adult children in crisis to extract money from elderly parents. These scammers often researched their targets extensively and used voice-altering technology to sound like the victim's relative. "Mrs. Henderson, I strongly recommend you contact Kevin directly before proceeding with this payment. Call his regular phone number or visit him in person to confirm this situation is real." Patricia shook her head vigorously. "I can't. The blackmailers are monitoring his communications. If they suspect he's told anyone, they'll follow through on their threats immediately. The only safe way to help him is to complete this car purchase exactly as they've instructed." The car purchase was clearly a money laundering mechanism. Rather than asking for direct payment, the scammers were having Patricia buy a vehicle that they could then resell or use for other criminal purposes. This approach made the transaction seem more legitimate and harder for authorities to trace. I tried a different approach. "What kind of compromising information are they threatening to release?" Patricia became uncomfortable and evasive. "It's personal. Something from Kevin's past that could destroy his reputation and career in technology. I can't let that happen to him." "But Patricia, if this information is real and Kevin is genuinely being blackmailed, paying once won't make it stop. These criminals will just demand more money later. Kevin said this is a one-time payment to make the problem go away permanently. He's learned from his mistakes and will never put himself in this position again." Despite my concerns, I couldn't legally prevent Patricia from accessing her own money. I completed the withdrawal process but insisted on documenting my concerns and recommendations in her file. I also provided her with information about elder fraud and urged her to contact law enforcement if she suspected any deception. Patricia left my office with $18,500 in cash, determined to save her son from blackmail. I spent the rest of the day researching the car listing she'd mentioned and trying to find ways to verify Kevin's situation without violating Patricia's privacy. The Craigslist listing for the 2017 Honda Accord seemed legitimate at first glance, but several details raised red flags. The seller claimed to be relocating for military deployment and needed to sell quickly, but the photos were taken in what appeared to be a commercial lot rather than a residential setting. The contact information led to a prepaid phone number with no associated name or address. More concerning was that similar car listings appeared in multiple cities with identical descriptions but different contact information. This suggested a coordinated operation rather than a legitimate individual sale. I decided to contact Kevin directly, despite Patricia's instructions not to involve anyone else. I found his software development company's website and called their main number, asking to speak with him about a family emergency. Kevin was at work and completely unaware of any blackmail situation. He hadn't spoken to his mother in over a week and knew nothing about needing money for a car purchase. When I explained what Patricia had told me, Kevin was horrified and immediately concerned for his mother's safety. "Oh my God, someone's scamming my mom," Kevin said. I need to get to Springfield immediately to stop this. Kevin confirmed that he had never been blackmailed and had no compromising information that could be used against him. The entire scenario was fabricated by criminals who had somehow obtained enough personal information about their family to make the story believable. We realized Patricia might already be in the process of completing the fraudulent car purchase. Kevin tried calling his mother, but her phone went straight to voicemail. He immediately left Chicago and drove to Springfield while I contacted local police to report the suspected elder fraud. Detective Williams from the Springfield Police Department was familiar with these types of scams and agreed to help locate Patricia before she could complete the transaction. Using the Craigslist listing information, they identified the likely meeting location where Patricia would attempt to purchase the car. Police found Patricia at a gas station parking lot on Route 55, waiting to meet the supposed car seller with $18,500 in cash. She was confused and initially resistant when officers explained she was the victim of a scam, insisting that Kevin was in real danger and needed her help. When Kevin arrived and spoke with his mother directly, Patricia finally realized she had been deceived. The emotional manipulation had been so convincing that she had never questioned whether the initial phone call was actually from her son. The investigation revealed that the scammers had used sophisticated voice synthesis technology to impersonate Kevin, combined with detailed personal information obtained from social media and public records. They had researched the family extensively to make their story believable and emotional. The fake car seller never appeared at the meeting location, likely because the scammers realized law enforcement was involved. Police traced the Craigslist listing to a series of fake accounts that had been used for similar scams across multiple states. Patricia's case was part of a larger criminal network that specialized in targeting elderly parents through fake emergencies involving their adult children. The car purchase method was particularly insidious because it created a legitimate-seeming transaction that would be harder for victims and authorities to recognize as fraud. The financial and emotional impact on Patricia was devastating. Although she didn't lose her money, the stress of believing her son was in danger, and the humiliation of being deceived took a serious toll on her mental health. She became anxious about answering her phone and suspicious of any unexpected communications. Kevin moved back to Springfield temporarily to help his mother recover from the trauma and implement better security measures for her finances. They established code words for emergency communications and set up systems to verify any unusual requests for money. The case highlighted how criminals are using increasingly sophisticated technology and psychological manipulation to exploit elderly victims. The voice synthesis technology made it nearly impossible for Patricia to distinguish between her real son and the impersonator, especially when she was under emotional stress. Law enforcement was able to identify several other victims of the same scam network, including elderly parents who had actually lost money to similar fake emergency schemes. The total losses exceeded $200,000 across multiple states, with car purchases being just one of several money laundering methods used by the criminals. Patricia eventually recovered most of her emotional stability, but the experience fundamentally changed her approach to financial decisions and family communications. She became an advocate for elder fraud awareness and spoke at community events about her experience. The most important lesson from Patricia's case was that even intelligent, educated people can become victims when criminals use emotional manipulation and technological deception. The combination of a fabricated family emergency and sophisticated impersonation technology created a perfect storm of vulnerability. Kevin now calls his mother regularly with a predetermined schedule, and they've established specific verification procedures for any emergency communications. Patricia also moved her investment accounts to require additional approval for large withdrawals. Have you or your elderly family members ever received suspicious calls claiming a relative was in trouble and needed money immediately? What security measures do you use to verify emergency communications? And how do you protect elderly loved ones from these increasingly sophisticated scams? I've always been fascinated by antiques and vintage collectibles, spending countless weekends browsing estate sales and antique shops throughout North Carolina. What I discovered about a beautiful ceramic vase I bought last December made me question everything I thought I knew about privacy and surveillance. What seemed like an incredible find on Craigslist turned into the most violating and terrifying experience of my life. My name is Sarah, and I work as a marketing coordinator for Premier Logistics here in Clearwater, North Carolina. I live alone in a cozy 2-bedroom apartment on Magnolia Drive, and I've spent the last 5 years decorating it with carefully chosen vintage pieces that reflect my love for mid-century design and craftsmanship. My living room has become a showcase of authentic 1950s and 1960s furniture, pottery, and artwork that I've collected from various sources. Last December, I was browsing Craigslist's antique section during my lunch break when I found a listing that immediately caught my attention. Someone was selling a stunning ceramic vase described as mid-century modern art pottery museum quality perfect condition $85. The photos showed an elegant piece with a distinctive turquoise and gold glaze pattern that would complement my existing collection perfectly. The vase appeared to be approximately 12 inches tall with clean, geometric lines typical of California pottery from the 1950s. The glaze work looked exceptional in the photos, with rich color variations and a lustrous finish that suggested high-quality craftsmanship. For someone with my appreciation for authentic mid-century ceramics, this piece represented exactly the type of find that made hunting for vintage treasures so rewarding. The seller, who went by Robert D., claimed he was downsizing after his elderly mother's recent passing and needed to find good homes for her extensive pottery collection. His description was remarkably detailed and knowledgeable, mentioning that the piece was likely from a renowned California pottery studio and had been his mother's favorite display item for over 30 years. He even included information about the specific type of clay and glazing techniques that would have been used during that era. I contacted Robert immediately through the Craigslist email system, expressing genuine interest in the vase while sharing some details about my own collection and appreciation for mid-century ceramics. His response came within an hour and was impressively professional and knowledgeable. He seemed genuinely interested in finding someone who would appreciate the vase's artistic value rather than just selling to the highest bidder. "I'm so pleased to hear from someone who truly understands the craftsmanship of this era," Robert wrote in his email. "My mother would be delighted to know her treasured piece is going to someone who will display it properly and appreciate its historical significance." We arranged to meet that Saturday morning at his address on Forest Lane, a quiet residential street about 15 minutes from my apartment. Robert's responses throughout our communication were prompt and thoughtful, and he even offered to provide additional photographs from different angles if I wanted to examine specific details of the glaze work before making the trip. When I arrived at the meeting location at the agreed-upon time of 10 a.m., I found myself at a modest but well-maintained ranch-style house with a beautifully landscaped yard. The property looked exactly like the type of place where someone's elderly mother might have lived for decades, surrounded by the possessions she had carefully collected over a lifetime. Robert appeared to be in his early 50s, with graying hair and a neat appearance that suggested someone who took care of both himself and his surroundings. He was dressed casually in khakis and a button-down shirt, and he greeted me warmly at the front door with a genuine smile that immediately put me at ease. "You must be Sarah," he said, extending his hand for a friendly handshake. "I'm so glad you could make it. I think you're going to love this piece as much as my mother did." Robert invited me inside to see the vase in proper lighting, which I thought was very considerate. Many Craigslist sellers prefer to conduct transactions quickly at the doorstep, but Robert seemed genuinely interested in ensuring I could appreciate the piece fully before making a decision. The interior of the house was like stepping into a perfectly preserved museum of 1950s design. The living room contained authentic mid-century furniture pieces, including what appeared to be original Eames chairs, a stunning boomerang coffee table, and several other pottery pieces displayed throughout the room. Robert clearly had exceptional taste and extensive knowledge about the era, which gave me confidence in the authenticity of the vase. "My mother spent 40 years collecting these pieces," Robert explained as I admired the room. "She had an incredible eye for quality, and would only purchase items that met her very high standards. This vase was always her absolute favorite. She said it had a special presence that made it the centerpiece of her collection." The vase itself was even more spectacular in person than it had appeared in the photographs. The glaze work was absolutely exceptional, with subtle color variations and depth that could only be achieved through the sophisticated techniques used by master ceramicists. The proportions were perfect, and I could immediately envision it as the focal point of my own living room mantel. I spent several minutes examining the piece carefully, checking for any chips, cracks, or repairs that might affect its value or appearance. The vase appeared to be in absolutely pristine condition, with no visible flaws despite its age of nearly 70 years. The base contained what appeared to be a maker's mark, though it was partially obscured by the complex glaze pattern. "She always displayed it right there on the mantel," Robert said, pointing to a prominent spot above the fireplace. "She claimed it caught the light perfectly at different times of day, and that watching it was almost like meditation for her." Robert provided detailed background information about where his mother had originally purchased the vase, mentioning that she had bought it directly from the pottery studio in California during a trip in the late 1950s. He even showed me a few old photographs of his mother's living room where the vase was prominently displayed over the decades. The asking price of $85 seemed incredibly reasonable for such a high-quality piece. I had seen similar pottery selling for several $100s at established antique shops, and this vase appeared to be in superior condition to most examples I had encountered. Robert explained that he was more interested in finding someone who would appreciate the piece than in maximizing his profit. "I've had several collectors contact me with higher offers," Robert said, "but I really want this to go to someone who will treasure it the way my mother did. From your emails, I can tell you understand the artistry and historical significance of pieces like this." We completed the transaction quickly for the asking price of $85, which felt like winning the lottery for someone with my appreciation for authentic mid-century ceramics. Robert carefully wrapped the vase in multiple layers of protective padding, taking great care to ensure it would survive the transport to my apartment safely. As he helped me carry the wrapped vase to my 2019 Subaru Outback, Robert seemed genuinely pleased that the piece was going to someone who would display it properly rather than store it away or resell it for profit. He even provided me with a handwritten note containing the historical information he had shared, along with care instructions for maintaining the glaze. I drove home with tremendous excitement about my incredible find, already planning exactly where I would display the vase and how it would transform my living room's aesthetic. The piece represented exactly the type of authentic, high-quality vintage item that I had been searching for to complete my collection. Once I arrived home, I immediately unwrapped the vase and found the perfect spot for it on my living room mantel, where it could catch the afternoon light streaming through my large south-facing windows. The piece looked exactly as I had envisioned, adding a sophisticated focal point that elevated the entire room's design. For the first few weeks after the purchase, I was completely thrilled with my acquisition. The vase received numerous compliments from friends, family members, and co-workers who visited my apartment. It became a natural conversation piece, and I enjoyed sharing the story of how I had discovered such an exceptional piece through Craigslist. I spent considerable time researching similar pottery pieces online and in reference books, confirming that I had gotten an outstanding deal on what appeared to be a museum-quality example of mid-century California ceramics. Everything about the piece seemed authentic and consistent with the historical information Robert had provided. The first indication that something might be wrong came approximately 3 weeks after the purchase. I began noticing subtle changes in my apartment that I initially attributed to my own forgetfulness or stress from my increasingly demanding work schedule. Items would be in slightly different positions than I remembered leaving them, and I occasionally experienced an unsettling feeling that someone had been in my space while I was at the office. At first, I dismissed these sensations as paranoia or the result of working long hours on several challenging marketing campaigns. But the feeling of being observed became increasingly persistent and specific, particularly when I was spending time in my living room near the mantel where the vase was prominently displayed. I found myself becoming hyper-aware of my surroundings when I was at home, constantly checking locks and windows despite living in a secure apartment building with controlled access. The sensation of being watched was strongest during my evening routine when I would relax on my couch reading or watching television. The breakthrough came during a video call with my sister Emily one evening in late January. We were discussing our weekend plans when she made an offhand comment that changed everything. "That vase behind you is absolutely gorgeous, but there's something strange about the way the light reflects off it. It almost looks like there's something metallic inside the glaze pattern." Her observation prompted me to examine the vase more closely after we ended our call. Using a powerful flashlight and magnifying glass, I discovered what appeared to be a small electronic component embedded within the base of the vase, cleverly concealed within the decorative pattern of the glazework. The device was so professionally integrated that it was virtually invisible unless you knew exactly where to look and had proper lighting. My blood ran cold as I realized the implications of this discovery. The beautiful antique vase I had purchased and proudly displayed in my living room was actually a sophisticated surveillance device, designed to monitor everything that happened in my most private living space. Someone had been watching me in my own home for nearly a month. The violation I felt was immediate and overwhelming. Every private moment I had experienced in my living room reading, relaxing, talking on the phone, entertaining friends had potentially been observed by a complete stranger. The thought of someone watching my daily routines and personal activities made me physically ill. I immediately contacted the Clearwater Police Department and reported the discovery of hidden surveillance equipment in my home. The dispatcher took my report seriously and connected me with Detective Amanda Johnson, who specialized in privacy crimes and technology-related offenses. Detective Johnson arrived at my apartment within 2 hours and was immediately concerned about the sophisticated nature of the surveillance device. She explained that this type of professionally installed surveillance equipment represented a serious felony and was likely part of a larger criminal operation. "This isn't some amateur operation," Detective Johnson said as she examined the vase with specialized equipment. "The integration of this camera system required significant technical expertise and expensive equipment. We're dealing with professionals who have invested considerable resources into this surveillance scheme." The investigation revealed that the device inside the vase was a high-quality wireless camera with both video and audio recording capabilities. It was designed to transmit live feeds to a remote location, while also storing footage locally on internal memory cards. The camera lens was positioned to provide an optimal view of my entire living room, including my couch, dining area, and the entrance to my bedroom hallway. More disturbing was Detective Johnson's discovery that the surveillance equipment was connected to a sophisticated network infrastructure that could be accessed from anywhere in the world with internet connectivity. This meant that Robert, or whoever was behind the operation, could potentially monitor my daily activities in real time from any location. The technical analysis revealed that the device had been transmitting continuously since I had brought it home, creating a complete digital record of my private activities over the past month. The thought of strangers having access to weeks of footage from my personal life was devastating and violating beyond description. Detective Johnson advised me to leave the vase in place temporarily while the cybercrime unit attempted to trace the surveillance network and identify the individuals responsible for the operation. This was one of the most difficult decisions I had ever been asked to make, continuing to live under surveillance while pretending everything was normal so that law enforcement could gather evidence. During this investigation period, I stayed with my sister Emily and her family, unable to bear the thought of spending another night in my apartment, while knowing I was being watched. The psychological impact of the violation was severe, affecting my sleep, concentration at work, and overall sense of security and privacy. The investigation revealed that Robert D. had used a completely fabricated identity, and the Forest Lane address where we had met belonged to a vacant rental property. He had temporarily staged the entire location with period-appropriate furniture and decorations to support his elaborate story about liquidating his deceased mother's estate. Detective Johnson's team discovered that this wasn't an isolated incident but part of a sophisticated criminal enterprise operating across multiple states. They found evidence of similar surveillance devices being sold through fake antique and estate sale listings throughout North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, and Tennessee. The criminal organization was specifically targeting single women who appeared to live alone, based on analysis of their online communications, social media profiles, and purchasing patterns. They had developed detailed profiles of potential victims and were selling surveillance-equipped items that would appeal to each target's specific interests and decorating preferences. Through network analysis and digital forensics, investigators determined that at least 18 other victims had unknowingly purchased surveillance-equipped antiques from the same criminal organization over the past 2 years. The items included pottery pieces, decorative picture frames, vintage jewelry boxes, small sculptures, and even some furniture pieces, all containing hidden cameras or audio recording devices. The scope and sophistication of the operation was staggering. The criminals had invested significant resources into creating convincing backstories, staging fake meeting locations, and developing surveillance equipment that could be seamlessly integrated into authentic-looking vintage items. During the investigation, I learned that the surveillance footage was being used for multiple criminal purposes. The primary goal was gathering intelligence about victims' homes, daily routines, and valuable possessions to facilitate future burglaries. The criminals would study weeks or months of footage to determine when properties would be vacant and identify the most valuable items to target. More disturbing was the discovery that the organization was also selling access to live surveillance feeds to other criminals and potentially using collected footage for blackmail purposes. Some victims had been targeted for identity theft after criminals observed them entering passwords or handling personal documents within view of the hidden cameras. The breakthrough in identifying the suspects came when the cybercrime unit successfully traced the surveillance network's server infrastructure to a sophisticated operation based in Richmond, Virginia. The group consisted of 6 individuals with extensive backgrounds in electronics, computer networking, and antique restoration. Robert's real name was Ronald Mitchell, a 52-year-old former electronics technician who had been developing surveillance equipment for the organization. He was working with 2 partners who specialized in acquiring and modifying authentic vintage items to conceal the surveillance devices, and 3 others who handled the fake identity creation, victim targeting, and footage distribution aspects of the operation. The criminal enterprise had been operating for over 3 years and had successfully placed monitoring devices in more than 40 homes across the Southeast. Their annual profits exceeded $300,000 from a combination of burglary proceeds, surveillance equipment sales, and fees charged for access to live video feeds. Ronald and his 5 associates were arrested simultaneously in coordinated raids across Virginia and North Carolina. The evidence seized included extensive victim files, surveillance equipment manufacturing facilities, and terabytes of recorded footage from dozens of homes. During the court proceedings, I testified about the psychological impact of discovering that my most private moments had been violated and exploited by strangers. The violation of trust and invasion of privacy had fundamentally changed my sense of security and my ability to feel comfortable in my own home. Ronald received an 8-year federal prison sentence for conspiracy, illegal surveillance, invasion of privacy, fraud, and facilitating burglary. His associates received sentences ranging from 4 to 7 years, and all were required to pay substantial restitution to the identified victims. The investigation also revealed that my case was discovered relatively early in the surveillance process, before the criminals had used the collected footage for burglary or other serious crimes. Several other victims had experienced break-ins after their daily routines and valuable possessions had been studied through months of hidden camera surveillance. The experience fundamentally changed my approach to purchasing items from strangers and my awareness of potential privacy violations in the modern world. I now carefully inspect any decorative items I bring into my home using specialized detection equipment, and I have installed my own legitimate security system to monitor for unauthorized surveillance devices. I also became an advocate for privacy rights and digital security, speaking at community safety events and working with law enforcement to educate the public about the dangers of sophisticated surveillance schemes disguised as legitimate commerce. Many people remain unaware that criminals are using increasingly advanced technology to violate privacy through everyday objects. The most important lesson from my terrifying experience was that criminals are willing to invest extraordinary time, resources, and technical expertise into elaborate schemes that exploit people's trust and desire for beautiful, affordable antiques. The surveillance vase operation was particularly insidious because it turned victims' own homes into monitoring stations while appearing to offer them something they genuinely wanted. Since the case concluded, I've been extremely cautious about inviting strangers into my home for any reason and always insist on meeting sellers in public locations when purchasing items online. I also regularly sweep my living space for unauthorized surveillance equipment, and have educated my friends and family about the warning signs of these sophisticated privacy violations. Have you ever felt like you were being watched in your own home, or discovered that items you purchased might contain hidden surveillance technology? What precautions do you take when buying decorative items or antiques from strangers, and how do you protect your privacy in an age of increasingly sophisticated surveillance threats? Thanks so much for watching. I can't express enough how much your support means. The likes, the comments, it all really helps the channel grow. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to hit that like button and share your thoughts in the comments below. I always take the time to read them. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out on any new videos. See you next time.